There are reports of other airlines taking full advantage of the suspension of Comair by hiking their prices. Many customers with no other choice are apparently forking out way more than they normally would for flights. Consumer expert Wendy Knowler now joining us to unpack this. Wendy, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. So if this is happening, it means that these other airlines are actually capitalizing on a very difficult situation for passengers. Can they actually do that?
Okay, so first of all, I've been getting a lot of those complaints. I had a woman who was looking for a flight tomorrow. She's in Durban on holiday with her mum, and she went on, she found a flight. This was yesterday. She was about to pay. It was 1,700 per ticket, and then she got an error message, and when she went back in straight away, the same tickets were 3,200 rand. So obviously she felt that there was some kind of opportunistic exploitation going on there. So I canvassed this with FlySafair, of course, and their answer was nothing of the kind. They didn't even have the people that do the pricing on duty at the weekend. He said what happens is with all airlines, the earlier you book, those first tickets sold are actually sold at a loss, and as you progress in the run up to the departure time, they get more and more expensive. So on that particular flight that woman was complaining about, is fully sold now. Of course, the cheapest flights were 500, just over 500 rand, and the most expensive 3,500. So saying this is just a normal process. There was no intentional, exploitation of, oh, goody, there's a big demand now. Let's put up the prices. They're denying that happened. Well, certainly in FlySafair's case.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the responsibility of Comair, because we've seen passengers and spoken to them saying that they were actually allowed to check in and then get to the gates despite the officials and people at the counters knowing that their flights were suspended.
I mean, you can't make that up. I didn't canvass that with Comair, but clearly that is just completely unconscionable. Should never have happened. I've had several people saying, talking about the late notice. They were already at the airport when they heard, and that led to the scenes that we've seen playing out all over, which is, totally understandable. The issue, obviously, that I wanted to know as a consumer journalist was, what about refunds? I won't go into the technicalities, but in terms of the Consumer Protection Act, certainly refunds are due if you pay for something and you don't get the service for no reason of your own. So interestingly, earlier in the day, Shahan, the first statement I got from Comair was that, yes, refunds are available on British Airways flights, the domestic ones, but with Kalula, no refunds. You can rebook. There will be no penalty fee, but it sounded like they'll try and get you on the same class, but if they can't, obviously you'll have to pay in. And as I was writing a story up for Times Live, so I got word that actually, no, they've revised that, and now Kalula passengers holding tickets for flights that are cancelled can actually apply for refunds. The problem is, as we've seen from people at the airports, they still need to travel, they still need to get where they wanted to go, and they need to now buy another ticket if they can get it. Number one, they're scarce, and number two, they're a lot more expensive now. So now they've lost the money on the flight they've already paid for. They want the money back in their hands as soon as possible. And I know from past experience with this happening with airlines, refunds can take a very long time to come. We saw that when the Civil Aviation Authority grounded Comair flights, you remember, I think it was the end of 2019, and it took many, many months for those people to get their money back. So people are definitely going to be out of pocket here, and substantially so.
Yeah, and obviously, what's the option of Comair actually working with other airlines to try and get their passengers onto those aircraft of the other airlines? Is that something that they'll even do with Kalula? Because there seems to be different rules between British Airways and Kalula because of the price difference.
I think they do that, especially in a situation like that. They will accommodate as far as they can within their own fleets, both of them. You've probably heard on yesterday, they chartered 2 flights for what they call the most vulnerable passengers who were affected by the grounding. But I heard this afternoon that they don't have any further plans to do that. So now everyone's scrambling for themselves. I had a look with a long weekend coming up, Shahan. I had a look at the flights, for example, out of Joburg on Friday for Cape Town, and it's just a whole string of sold outs. I think Comair had one of its 8 flights out of Joburg, the only one that still had seats, and that's probably not the case now. was the very early sort of 6 o'clock flight. Flights sat there, not a single one of their 14 flights had a seat going. It'll obviously be the same on the way back on Monday. So a real crisis, I think, for people who need to be places. And, we've now got 40% of the seats in the market out of commission now. So you can imagine the knock-on effects of that.
Yeah, and then let's talk about the hotel situation. We heard from one passenger who said that, she's had to rebook hotels and she can't afford it. So does the airline have any responsibility in that regard, because they've actually left passengers stranded? And by the way, Wendy, this is not because of anything that's out of their hand. I mean, this is because of safety concerns that they've been grounded by the Civil Aviation Authority.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, Shahan, because when I tried to canvass, seek some comment from the Consumer Goods and Services Ombudsman on this issue, obviously from early this morning, they're involved in World Consumer Rights Day functions, ironically, in KZN at the moment. So it's difficult to get in touch, but I was, towards the end of the afternoon, pointed to Section 47 of the Consumer Protection Act. And that actually relates to, it's technically known as overbooking, but it's any situation where a service provider, such as an airline, can't provide the service when somebody has already paid for it at a certain time. So that would apply to this situation. And it says they must refund with interest. And to your question around hotels, any direct costs that came as any cost that was a direct consequence of their failure to supply the service. So, for example, a hotel accommodation, there is an out, and that is if it's beyond their control, but not if the supplier themselves, in their failure to perform, led to that situation where it was out of their control. I'm paraphrasing it probably quite badly because it's a long section, but essentially, as to your question, it was their safety issues, spate of them recently, that led to the Civil Aviation Authority making this decision reportedly. So they can't say it was beyond their control. And so it'll be very interesting to see going forward. I can't see it happening easily, but according to the Act, and one hopes the authorities will support consumers in this, or the Ombudsman at least, that they should be paying any cost that somebody had as a direct result of them not being able to get that flight. So, for example, having to stay over somewhere for an extra night, that should be covered, according to my reading of the Act anyway.
Yeah, definitely. There's no snowstorm in South Africa, so it wasn't out of their control. We're going to leave it right there. Appreciate your input, consumer expert Wendy Knowler.